Studio Ghibli remains one of the most acclaimed animation studios in history, with several of their films regarded as some of the best work in cinema. And not just in the realm of animation, they've been around for 41 years at this point, having released 22 feature films, 2 television films, and a TV series. Having seen every one of their films multiple times, I wanted to make this video to highlight just how important these films have been in my life and how it really should be seen by everyone. So, they started off with Castle in the Sky, also called La Puta, in 1986, but in actuality, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind was the first unofficial Studio Ghibli movie written and directed by Hayao Miyazaki in 1984, who at the time was developing the Nausicaa manga and was convinced to make a movie out of it on the condition that he would be the one to direct it. Miyazaki was given this opportunity due to the major success of his directorial debut, The Castle of Cagliostro, which even today is considered as one of the most influential animated movies of all time. Nausicaa ended up shattering all expectations for the film and has been cited as the major reason for the creation of the studio itself. This was also the first ever collaboration with acclaimed music composer Joe Hisaishi, who ended up doing the score for all but one of Miyazaki's films. After the massive success of Nausicaa, Miyazaki decided to team up with his producer Isao Takahata for another project, and in the process created their own animation studio, which of course we all know today as Studio Ghibli. This project ended up being La Puta, or Castle in the Sky, which was inspired by the coal miners' strike of 1984 in Wales, where Miyazaki visited, and its beautiful scenery and retrofuturistic style was an inspiration for other acclaimed filmmakers like John Lasseter of Pixar and Hideaki Anno, who created one of the biggest anime franchises of all time, Neon Genesis Evangelion. Studio Ghibli were known for their persistence in using hand-drawn style animation, with up to 70,000 celluloid drawings being used for Castle in the Sky, made almost entirely with watercolor and acrylic paints. This became their standard for all their films, and the use of computer animation were few and far between until the release of Earwig and the Witch in 2020, which was made entirely in CGI and incidentally ended up being their lowest rated film. Following the success of La Puta, Miyazaki wanted to make a movie based in the Japan countryside, and it was my personal favorite of all his works, My Neighbor Totoro. It's one of those movies that you decide to put on a lazy Sunday afternoon and it just never gets old. I've actually lost count of how many times I've seen it. There's just something about it that feels so nostalgic to me. It reminds me of the times I used to visit my grandparents in the countryside of India. It tells the story of 2 little girls, one of whom was based on Miyazaki's niece, moving with their father to the countryside to be close to their mother, who is recovering from an illness. The girls befriend a large but cute tree spirit from their backyard, which ends up being the basis of the story. This tree spirit, affectionately called Totoro by one of the girls, ended up becoming so popular that Studio Ghibli made it their official logo in 1991, which we all know today. 1988 was a landmark year for Studio Ghibli and for animation as a whole, as they released another film at the same time as Totoro, and it was arguably their greatest ever film, Grave of the Fireflies, based on the critically acclaimed short story of the same name by Akiyuki Nosaka, which follows the author's own experience of the Pacific War and how it affected the people of Kobe, Japan. Grave of the Fireflies remains one of the films that you watch once and never forget, whilst simultaneously being one of the best movies depicting the horrors of war. Directed by Isao Takahata, the other brain behind Studio Ghibli, it was decided that both films would be released at the same time as financiers at Tokuma Shoten, the parent company of the studio, only agreed to release the film if they adapted the popular novel Grave of the Fireflies as well. I've also read that Akira was released in 1988 as well. Can you even imagine three iconic masterpieces of cinema all being released in the same year? That just seems crazy. Next up, we have Kiki's Delivery Service, another one of those films I keep rewatching every once in a while due to how wonderfully heartwarming it is. With its picturesque landscapes inspired by Miyazaki's earlier trips to Sweden, it was the film that actually propelled Studio Ghibli to new heights, as the two juggernauts that preceded it surprisingly did not do very well in the box office, for reasons unknown. After the success of Kiki, Miyazaki approached Isao Takahata to direct a film based on the popular manga Omohide Poro Poro, also known as Only Yesterday. One of Ghibli's most underrated films, it follows the story of a young woman named Taeko who goes on a holiday in the countryside to visit her relatives whilst reminiscing about her past. It was extremely well received and it ended up being the highest grossing film in Japan at the time in 1991. I feel like this film constantly goes under the radar when it comes to Ghibli for whatever reason. And it's actually my mom's favorite because it closely resembles her own childhood where she spent time with her grandmother tending to the fields, and that's where, for me, Ghibli stands apart. The ability to trigger strong emotion and nostalgia. Along with Only Yesterday, I wanted to talk about some of the underrated Ghibli films that everyone should watch. Starting with Ocean Waves, this was just one out of the two films Studio Ghibli made for television, the other being the much maligned Yovik and the Witch. Released in 1993, Ocean Waves is based on the novel of the same name written by Saeko Himuro, and it follows the story of Taku and his best friend Yutaka, who develops feelings for the attractive new transfer student from Tokyo. While Taku initially finds her cold and arrogant, he also eventually falls for her, but decides not to act on it due to his unwavering loyalty to his friend, which unfortunately creates even more problems. Taku, as a main character, isn't anything special. He has average grades, does not seem to be passionate about anything aside from trying to rally this class to secure a holiday in Hawaii. But his ability to just drop everything and help someone, no matter what the situation is, makes him one of the best main characters in Ghibli. The film faced criticism for not being quote unquote Ghibli like, but it was a welcome change for me and it ended up being one of my favorite ever Ghibli works. It was directed by Tomomi Mochizuki, well known for directing iconic works like My Son Ikoku and Ranma Half. And it was the first time a Ghibli movie was directed by someone other than Miyazaki and Takahata. There's just so much about this movie that I want to talk about, but I'll leave that for a separate video. Whisper of the Heart. Moving on to another underrated classic, Whisper of the Heart was released in 1995 to great success, becoming the highest grossing Japanese film that year domestically, but it hardly ever gets mentioned amongst Ghibli's best. Its main character, Shizuku, is the inspiration behind the famous Lo-Fi Girl YouTube channel, which I'm pretty sure everyone has seen at some point. And the movie uses a Japanese rendition of John Denver's iconic song Take Me Home, Country Roads. It was directed by frequent Ghibli collaborator Yoshifumi Kondo and written by Miyazaki. Adapted from Aoi Hiraki's 1989 manga, the film touches on so many important themes about pursuing your dreams, no matter what they are. And this is why I feel like Ghibli is so necessary in a world full of generated AI and slop content that children consume every single day without any sort of restriction or control. There's a very beautiful quote in the film by a character I can only imagine to be a self insert of Miyazaki himself. And it goes like, the rough stone is inside you. You just have to find it and then polish it. For someone like me that finds motivation to follow through with whatever I'm doing very difficult, this movie awakened something in me, and I'm sure it will for anyone struggling with procrastination. From Up on Poppy Hill was one of the two feature films directed by Hayao Miyazaki's son Goro, who faced a lot of criticism for his first feature film, Tales of Earthsea, which, to be fair, came right after Howl's Moving Castle, one of Ghibli's most acclaimed works, so critics were expecting continued excellence, I presume. I personally didn't think that Tales of Earthsea was that bad. It was still a decent film with some over the top ideas that kind of fell flat with its execution, but that was certainly not the case with his second venture, From Up on Poppy Hill. Released in 2011, it was based on the 1980 manga of the same name and follows a high school student named Umi, who runs a boarding house that was converted from an abandoned hospital called Kokiliko Manor, which is the French word for poppy. The opening sequence is most memorable, which showcases the girl waking up early and doing all the necessary chores, which would normally be done by more than one person, alongside actually getting ready for school somehow, with the film's iconic soundtrack, The Breakfast Song, playing. The underlying plot of the film centers around Umi befriending a boy named Shun Kazama, and together they attempt to stop the school from demolishing a beloved clubhouse in anticipation of the 1964 Olympics held in Japan. The film explores youthful romance in a beautiful way, and just like most Ghibli films, the plot is simple and it doesn't have to be anything else. I also wanted to touch upon a couple of other films you may or may not have seen, one of them being When Marnie Was There. This maybe would not fall into the quote unquote underrated category because it was nominated for an Oscar, but I wanted to include it as well because I don't really see a lot of people talk about it. Based on the 1967 novel by Joan G. Robinson, it follows the story of a young girl named Anna who travels to a seaside town in Hokkaido to recover from an asthma attack she suffered at school, where she meets a strange blonde girl named Marnie. It's a beautiful but haunting film that tackles loneliness, abandonment, and friendship very well. Also, this is yet another extremely important film to show children, which is why I love Ghibli so much. Every film, aside from maybe Grave of the Fireflies, can be watched by every age group and enjoyed just the same. An important thing to note is that this film was the last one that Studio Ghibli worked on before going on a hiatus due to Miyazaki's short lived retirement until he decided to make Boy and the Heron. The Secret World of Arrietty is another one of my favorites, with its luscious and rich greenery, perfectly serenaded by Breton composer Cecile Corbel, having arguably the best soundtrack of any Ghibli movie. Adapted from the 1952 acclaimed novel series The Borrowers by Mary Norton, it was a film Miyazaki and Takahata had been trying to make for nearly 40 years. Directed by Hiromasa Yonebayashi, the acclaimed director behind When Mani Was There, it follows the unusual story of a family of little people known as borrowers living amongst humans and how they evade capture and detection. I know I haven't really touched on too much about Ghibli's more well known fare like Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, The Wind Rises, and Princess Mononoke. Well, that's because these films are already some of the most watched animated films ever, and I don't need to convince anybody to actually watch them. And talking about them would simply be reductive. The purpose of this video was to encourage people and children to watch their more underrated films. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, and if you liked this video and want more content like this, please like and comment below. See ya.